Welcome to the I'm Telling God About This podcast. Russell Brand has now been baptized. Just recently, Kat Von D got baptized. Jordan Peterson has titled his new tour, We Who Wrestle with God, and I guess maybe Christianity's cool again. So what do you guys think about that?
Unless you're Kanye West and you're going to reject it. And
Kanye West, who launched arguably one of the best Christian albums, and then unfortunately has now confirmed he's also launching a porn website, so that you can fall off the wagon just as fast as you get on it.
Oh my gosh, yes. But Russell Brand, man.
Dude, here's what I love about Russell Brand. I've always ever since I think for a lot of Americans, we heard about him through like Forgetting Sarah Marshall, I think was probably the first.
Get him to the Greek
Get Him to the Greek came after that.
That's true.
He was. I remember watching an interview with him back then. And he's like, a lot of Americans are freaking out. Like, I'm having a moment in America because you guys didn't know who I was. But like, I'm a bit of an inside joke for like the UK, because he's been a radio host for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of Americans loved, like, he had that whole like Captain Jack Sparrow, like he's all over the place, but also with a distinct philosophical wit. And he's one of those people like Jordan Peterson, where you're watching them and you're listening to the things that they're saying and what resonates with them. And as a Christian, you can't help but be like, oh, dude, like you can see where they're missing it, because they'll tell you like their preconceived notions, their hang-ups with it, and it's so frustrating. And then, like, I remember with Jordan Peterson thinking, like, dude, that guy is one major life crisis from finding Jesus. Like, he just hasn't suffered enough. He thinks he's too smart. He thinks he's got it figured out. He just hasn't had a chance to suffer enough. And then when he went through his whole thing, sure enough, when he was broken, look where he finds himself. And I think Russell Brand is, like, one of those guys, too. I used to joke, this is an interesting joke. We'll see how this goes over. But like, I used to make this joke about Elton John where I was like, a lot of people are surprised or like they're frustrated. They don't understand how people can become gay. And I was like, I think the best argument that the homosexual community has is Elton John, purely on the law of diminishing returns. If you were as famous as Elton John for as long as Elton John was famous and had access to all that Elton John had access to for as many decades as Elton John had access to it, you'd probably move on to something else too. Which is not a logical argument. Do not take that. However, Russell Brand is the same concept, but with like spirituality. Like, the dude has dipped his toe into every pond and has realized that they all fail to meet and scratch that deeper itch.
Go ahead. Nick.
How much have you watched Russell Brand's content? Because I've consumed a ton of it.
Quite a bit. Yeah.
Okay, good. Because
can I comment on that?
Yeah, go for it.
I was going to say, just before, because I want to let you go into the timeline, but I remember distinctly, like, when it was exposed to Russell Brand with all the, all the movies that he was in, one of the things that I looked at, I was like, this guy's a pompous, like, a-hole. Like, this guy, I don't like him at all. Like, he's arrogant. He's overly British. Like, I just couldn't stand him. And then he would interact with politics, and I'm like, this guy's an idiot. He's an absolute idiot. But I remember, Nick, you had mentioned, you're like, man, I've been listening to a lot of Russell Brand. I'm like, that guy. Like,
Russell
why
Brand?
would you listen to that guy? And you were the one that kind of said, no, he's had a journey. I think he's gotten. And one of the things, I don't know if you said it or if I heard it somewhere else, I think he had like a kind of a realization moment where he's like, yeah, I'm kind of tired of being an idiot and not knowing what I'm talking about. And he started to really engage in conversations and being honest with himself without like excusing his past behavior. And it's like, wow, there's a lesson in humility. This guy who came from, all of these ridiculous comments in the past, politics and religion and just mocking God. And now, but yeah, he's been on a journey, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally the prodigal son narrative. Like, his path is almost literally that. And I don't remember when it was that I told you that, but when he was in hard drugs, deep Hollywood fame, incredible amounts of promiscuity, and he talks about all of this publicly. He started his recovery journey really in AA, and that's what sparked a lot of it. And I would say for the better part of 7 years, 8 years, maybe
It's
10.
a while.
He's been now. He really kind of initially was like all over the spiritual place, but like he was grasping, and it was obvious he was grasping. And back to your comment, Josh, where it's like I kind of love seeing that because I am engaging with these cultural people, and I'm like, bro, you're gonna hop, skip, and stumble and find yourself where you're supposed to be, and it's only a matter of time because Jesus is going to get you. And
because you know what it is. We talk about this before, and again, like why this podcast is so important, or like not so important. I don't think it's that important, but why I think it's important to have conversations
like and
like
subscribe.
this.
It's that important.
Yeah,
Like and
for real. But before we get into that, go ahead and like and subscribe. Ring that bell. Why I think these kind of conversations are important is because the thing that upsets so many people before they're seeking, it's kind of like with grief. I think maturity and growing, like in your own journey of understanding who you are, like answering the big existential questions, there's a grief that comes with it because you think you have the world figured out as a child. And then as you become an adult, you slowly, like your understanding of the world gets killed in front of you. And you realize that certain things that you've believed, you either have believed wrongly or not had a correct understanding of, or that they were completely wrong altogether. And so it's a very destabilizing thing. You go through anger, you get frustration. And so what I see with that is, and I deal with this a lot because I talk about this with people quite a bit, the people who I find are angry or they have like a kind of a visceral reaction to the exclusivity claims of Christianity, it's because they look at that and go like, who are you? How do you have such confidence? Who are you to say that you're certain? Because they themselves are like, I've been robbed of that by reality, and I see no clear path. So then what happens is as they come to grips with the fact that, like, first they resent the truth claim, the exclusivity claim, and they look all around to these things that appeal to their baser nature. And when they find that they try to put weight on those things will not give them the thing they find that they want, they can't get from them, which is solid footing. You go and try to put your foot and say, is this true? And the Buddhist monk will say, maybe. You say, is this true? The New Age ideology says it's a way to look at it.
Right.
You know,
it's my
but
truth.
only in Christianity or in Islam, in Christianity or some of the other, Abrahamic religions, will you find exclusive truth claims. And that's ultimately when you're so tired of swimming in the ocean that you'll climb up on the first solid rock that you find. And, we hope, obviously, that it ends up being the right one.
And it's suffering. I think suffering is part of, general revelation as well, right? Like the evidence of God is all around us in creation, but not just in that, but in suffering, right? Like, and I think that's really, I think one of the things that Jordan Peterson talks about in his, we who wrestle with God, basing it on the story of Jacob, who wrestled with God and was named Israel, which means wrestling with God. Is the suffering aspect, suffering through it, right? And those God's chosen people are named for wrestling with God, right? And so having suffering through life, suffering through life, it really helps you to kind of say, like, what is important, what is truth, what sticks to the wall, what falls away, right? And oftentimes it's the exclusivity of Christianity that really remains, because the evidence
it's
for
the instrument, it's the implement of the suffering, Josh. It's the thing we've talked about before, the stumbling block, right? When you stop beating around the bush, and this is what the church has failed at, is we think we're being approachable by not using Christian language. Oh, it's a barrier, guys. It's just a barrier to a relationship. How are they going to know? unless they know relationship. No, the Bible says, how will they hear, and how will they believe unless they hear? How will they hear unless someone preaches? Therefore be transformed by the renewing of your mind. All scripture is God breathed. Like, no, the barrier is what demands, like, human beings, when we see things that somebody says that's too hard, our inclination is not, I'll walk away from that. No, like, when we're really seeking for the deeper things, our inclination is, don't tell me I can't do that. Right? Like, you want to see a man grow. I had a conversation with some of our pastors today talking about, we've got a new theme for the chapel, Christ-centered, people-focused, right? And the conversation is like, how do we get them to be Christ-centered people? Love God, love people, like it's very similar to, it's an oversimplification of
every
the gospel
other
message.
Church mission
Correct.
statement.
And so it's like, oh, we gotta, saturate it. Let's get the going. Yeah, I'm like, okay, cool. But then the question is like, well, why aren't they doing it? Why can't we get people engaged? Why can't we get them to do it? And I'm like, well, it's because we haven't made it hard enough yet. Well, what do you mean? Like, you have to tell them that the thing that they need to do, like, first of all, that there is something they have to do. And this is why Christians shy away from this, because they're like, well, faith without works, without faith. Like, we're not talking about salvation. We're talking about sanctification, the business of this side of heaven, right? Maturing. Yeah, there are things we have to do, and those things are hard. You're going to have to study, and you're going to have to pay attention, and you're going to have to do uncomfortable things. And
well,
how much
of our society and cultural Christianity, or Christians in the church today, not just in, America, but around the world, how many people, majority of people are drinking milk? And that's the thing. It's like, Paul is talking to the church and saying, you guys have been drinking milk. You guys should be eating meat by now. And it's a maturing aspect. You should be maturing and feeding yourself. And that is the struggle. That is going through the trials, the tribulations. That's studying the Bible for yourself. That's, not going and following and getting fed by John MacArthur every Sunday, though, not a bad thing, right? Like, but I mean,
unless you have PTSD.
Unless you have PTSD, and then
come on, John.
Oh my gosh! Like, well, okay, that's another episode about the.
But it's the same concept, because here's the issue: Christians are so quick to look at people like Kanye, or Russell Brand, or these guys, and be like, "Oh, they don't know," and I'm looking at them, and I'm like, okay, first of all, this guy has the humility, first of all, to admit he doesn't know what the heck's going on, right? He has the humility to say, I've tried a lot of random things. I feel like I think that this makes sense to me. I think this is right. And I recognize, and can you imagine being a public figure like Kanye, or a public figure like Russell Brand, where you have publicly, there is soundbite after soundbite of you saying the most atrocious, heretical nonsense, and to be able to step back from that without pride in your heart and say, yeah, that guy was a clown. That guy was wrong. Right? I mean, think about Kanye. Like, look, he's clearly
crazy,
dealing with things, right?
Right.
Mentally dealing with severe, clearly dealing with mental illness, right?
John MacArthur thinks that he's just making it all up. But,
right, he's making it up. But here's a guy who literally claimed to be God, and recently. Then, but that was again,
Oh yeah, okay.
But before,
Sorry,
right?
Go ahead.
When he, with Jesus and all of that, right? But then, he goes and he does, he goes and he puts out some incredible worship music. He creates an incredible concept of like his whole Sunday service thing. And then arguably, that's a large reason of why he ended up getting divorced from Kim Kardashian, was because she wasn't cool with the standard that he was putting on her. And to be honest, this is why it's hard. And I get it. People who are used to being the boss are not easy to lead. In a military environment, I deal with that all the time. It's like, it's hard. Your average pastor, think about this, like your average pastor, your average person, imagine trying to be like a pastor to Kanye West or Justin Bieber or Russell Brand.
Oh, that's
This
a good
is a
one.
man who doesn't have to be around anyone he doesn't want to be around. He needs nothing from you apart from his ability, at least from his ability to, and what is his biggest, and think about this, you're a pastor leading them. What is their biggest blind spot? That they need somebody who's willing to speak truth to power to them, who's willing to hide them from their, or like to help them see themselves clearly, and lead them. But this is a person who can just cut them out at a moment's notice.
Right.
That can go find any number of other pastors who will validate their behavior or belief system. Like, so for people who are just like, oh, they just need a good pastor. Well, yeah, but they also have to be mature enough to see that their, like, the power dynamic is such that it's very difficult to lead a person who is in that space.
And it's not just celebrities that are coming to faith. It's also celebrity pastors too. I mean, you think that any of these celebrity pastors, right? Like if somebody's speaking like, hey, Stephen Furtick or, all of these, Joel Osteen, you think they're going to be like, oh, let me just submit myself to some correction. They're like, no, screw you. I got thousands of members and I got billions of dollars coming in a year. Like, what are you talking about? I make up my own theology. Like, not to say I'm not calling out like any kind of teaching right now. I'm just talking about like the mentality of people. It's if you have the power and you're not used to being held accountable, like that happens on the spectrum of the hyper charismatics, or even to the extent where like I would even argue that Mark Driscoll, right? He went and submitted himself,
or
and now
John
he's
MacArthur.
Or John MacArthur, right? Especially with some of the horrific things that come out of these churches and these abuses, and they try to get corrected, but it's like nope, we got to protect the man, protect the man,
right.
Protect the man, which is a dangerous place to be in.
As individuals, we are called to live in the upside down world, the world where you are supposed to serve. You are the first. The first will be last, and the last will be first. And so it's like, I've always looked at whether it's the mega pastor who's off his rocker, or it's the Shia LaBeouf, or the Russell Brand, or the and any number. I've always
Cut in,
looked
say
at
Christ
it,
is king.
I've always looked at it as a mile marker, right? Like I think too many people it's almost worth saying don't go looking, because there's a million Christians bashing the salvation of every one of these. Kat Von D just got a ton of it when she got baptized and professed Christ. And so I don't know, I feel like it's like we missed the boat and we're all just looking for something to argue about. And I don't know, for me, kind of like what we're doing here, what I know each of you do as well, it's like, it's almost like, let's not stoop to that level. Let's pray for our leaders. Let's pray for our celebrities that have accepted Christ. Like, I do not envy being at the top. My dream is to have built the pyramids and be in the shadows and no one know my name.
Yeah, who was
like,
it?
Well,
not
off to a great start.
Preach
with
the
this
gospel,
awesome
die and be
podcast
forgotten.
here.
That's right. But no, I agree with you.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Like,
I hear you though.
we have. So let's talk about this. So yeah, I mean, on the one hand, you are a cultural icon. You're the canary in the coal mine. You're a picture of the zeitgeist. Like when people feel, like let's even just take the time between Jordan Peterson and Russell Brand, all right, or even Kanye and Russell Brand. When Kanye came out, he's a musician, right? So nobody really cares if a musician becomes a Christian. They're writing art. Maybe it's contrary to the normal narrative. Maybe they're worried like, oh, Kanye's going to rap about, the kingdom of God instead of, prostitution and drugs. But like nobody's really losing sleep about that. You know what I'm saying? Nobody's really going to cancel Kanye over that, right? But when a scientist or respected psychiatrist who's tapped into, kind of the zeitgeist, when he finds Jesus, like the reason that not Russell Brand, but like Jordan Peterson had the success that he did was because his stuff made sense to Christians because it was basically the observations of the reality of the world, but he wasn't an overt Christian. And so we got a pass. And he was able to be public. And so non-Christians could be like, yeah, I'm not really Christian, but like I'm super into Jordan Peterson. And it's like, cool story,
He's still
bro.
doing that, by the way. He's still there.
Tracking all. But the difference is, now that he's coming out as a Christian, what's happened? They're coming
Jordan
for
Peterson's
his
not.
licensure.
Jordan
Jordan
Peterson's
Peterson's
I don't think
he's not. Dude, the guy's borderline.
He's still way off.
pro Christian. He's. I wonder. If,
He's borderline.
that's
I'm telling you.
I wonder.
He's borderline.
I wonder
If you ask him,
and
I'm not saying he's a born again believer. I'm not saying that, but
We're not
the
arguing
moment
that.
he
I'm saying
shifted
he
his
is
tone-
staying away from it.
he was
He's not.
He was.
Yes, he
he
is.
did a whole thing on.
Well, hold on.
His
Hold on.
lecture series
He-
on Genesis, his lecture series on Exodus, he still intentionally will not say, I am a Christian. And every time somebody asks him, does he believe in God? He runs on this huge tangent of, what do you even mean?
What
Like,
is a-
he's
what is a
wicked
believer?
close.
Yeah, I get it, but he's
Yeah.
doing that on purpose because
Well-
he's doing. I'm sure. I'm not going to presume to know why he's doing it, but what it seems to me is exactly that. He doesn't want it to become the conversation about Russell Bryan. He wants to talk about what he's talking about, right?
Yep.
And
Which
that's-
is fair.
I would say that that's probably what he's doing. I mean, he was on a podcast, his podcast. He had Jonathan Pettigrew, or he's a Orthodox, guy, and he was talking about this
Jonathan
Christ.
Pageau. Yeah,
Pageau,
he's really
that's
good
what
He's really good buddies with Jonathan. He's like an in iconography. That's like Jonathan's
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
He does like
Yeah, Orthodox.
icons.
So in the conversation, Jordan Peterson is like is coming to tears, and he's
Yep.
talking about like this the Christ resurrection, and that he's the Son of God and God in flesh, and he's like, and I think that I believe that, right? Which is as close as you could say to a confession.
Well, that's what he
but
said.
actually
But
doing a
listen, that's what he
confession.
said there. So I'm not going to say that he's a full-on.
No,
born
I
again
agree,
believer.
especially if you're gonna. But I think that it's probably not a bad strategy. Granted, I would like him to profess, but I'm saying it's not a
Hey,
bad
he will.
strategy from
He
what
will.
he's wanting to do.
Mark
he
my
wants to be
words.
heard. But think
Jordan
about
Peterson
it. I mean,
will come out publicly as a believer by the end of this year. Bet.
Nope. I'll take a bet.
$100. $100.
Done.
$100. You heard it
I'm
here
in.
first, folks.
I'm in.
if
Comment down
if it
below.
doesn't happen,
Get in
if it
the
doesn't
pool.
happen- if it doesn't happen, please
That's
don't
right.
stone Josh. He's not
Yeah,
claiming to
it's
be
gonna
a
happen. I'm
prophet.
telling you. Listen,
Nope.
I'm not claiming to be a
Absolutely
prophet,
not.
but I'm telling you why. Here's why I believe that. Let me
Oh,
tell you
man.
why I believe that. This is why I believe that because what we're seeing happen right now is exactly what we've been talking about. The pendulum is swinging back, and what is going to happen is people are not going to be okay with one thing or the other. Because once it becomes okay for me to be overt with my belief system and for me to draw lines in the sand, then like we're not going to go straight to division yet, but like it's going to be the core values, the conviction is going to be the thing that drives the next batch of what I would consider to be like philosophical, ideological, religious celebrities. It's not just, it's going to be about like, hey, what do you know, and these things, but it's going to be about their passion. It's going to be about their zealotry. And Jordan Peterson is a zealot, make no mistake. He's a zealot. And there's a disconnect right now that I don't think he's going to be able to sit in that tension for too much longer. And so, yeah, I would not be surprised if that man comes out in the next year and says that.
Let me bring up a comparison based on that. You're saying that the pendulum is swinging, right? And what's driving that, right? If we make a comparison, and if we go back to the 60s, right, with the beatniks and the hippies and the free love and all that
Wrong
stuff,
era, though.
there was. Well, hold on.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes,
Well,
okay.
I'll let you cook.
We're
Go
going by
ahead.
the
Go
fourth
ahead.
Turning.
Go
but
ahead.
Yeah,
The truth, but
there
okay,
was
go ahead.
The Jesus movement, right?
Yes.
The last big revival, right, in America. It was the Jesus movement. You had the Calvary Chapel, the Vineyard movement, and you got all of these people, these hippies, going and giving themselves, to Christ and converting. And then a lot of people fell away, but there was a lot of pushback even then, right? All these hippies, they need to change this, they need to change that. They can't go into church dressing in with jeans with their holes in them, and some of them are still doing drugs and all of these things, right? And so there's this like push and pull, right? And so you had a lot of the hippies today now make up the charismatic church, because the charismatic church was the ones, and all spectrums of the charismatic church, because there wasn't really a hyper charismatic at that point other than the Pentecostals. But the idea of that this movement of Jesus people came in, and it was because they were unsatisfied with what drugs were doing to them. They were unsatisfied with the fulfillment that the world and sex and free love and all of this stuff, like no regulations, and it just wasn't satisfying. And then they had and this is why I'm saying that the charismatic movement definitely drew them in, because there was a lot of stuff that was happening in, like, say, Calvary Chapel and the Jesus movement down in Southern California and other places where people are having these amazing encounters with God, and like being totally transformed and feeling fulfilled more than any drug or anything that could. And so that
and
was
it was counter to the pre-biblical.
Well, I would say it's a response. It was a response to the false or the counterfeit that society was giving them, and they got the full truth. And so bringing it back to today, that pendulum that is swinging, and you said that it's the zealotry, or it's going to be the purity. What I mean by zealotry is what I'm saying is it's about. Oh, what are you saying? What's the counterfeit of what? What is the counterfeit today that Christianity is answering? That people are trying out.
Simple postmodernism and relativism.
So it's more of an intellectual.
No, it's a reality, not just intellectual. It's both. It's one leading to the other. What people have been brought up to believe is, like, let's just say within our culture in America, if you grew up, I mean, I'll say this, like, within the age demographic that listens to this podcast, which, in case any of you are wondering, is mostly like 25 to 35-year-old men. So
we got
good on you.
Good on you,
gents. For you women in there, we're here for it.
Thank you for being here.
Thank
you for being here.
So, hey, also, while we're on statistics, and I'll get back to this in a second, like, a lot of you watching are not subscribed. I know, because YouTube told me, and you can trust YouTube. So we see you, and we would like you to subscribe.
So what's your point?
Okay, so what I'm getting at is, what's the counter, right? So here's what it is. It's society has, like, we're striving for this search for answers, this intellectual curiosity. It's like, oh, we're exploring the cosmos because, we want to become scientists, we want to become engineers, because if we can peel back the onion, we can discover the answers to the existential questions. Who am I? Where do I come from? Where am I going? Why does it matter? And that's not happening. And so what's happening is they're realizing that science has limits because it's a closed system. And so then they're like, now we're going into the existential. And what they're finding is that even if they find something that makes sense to them intellectually, that it's not resulting in the tangible things. It's not dealing with anxiety. It's not giving them a roadmap to how to raise their families. It's not doing any of those things. So then they're like, well, okay, like, I'm at the stage now where I just need to figure out, like, which way is up. Like, I need a path. I need a direction. And there's not a lot of games in town right now that are saying, to quote, the Mandalorian in the early church, this is the way.
This is the way.
That is what people want. And it's because they are tired in need. Yes, exactly.
They're seeing it in culture. You look at Richard Dawkins, right? He's basically, God delusion, right? Like one of the four horsemen of the new atheist movement, who's debating all of these Christians and speaking against Christianity, and recently came out and said, like, no, the UK is a Christian nation. I'd much rather there be Christianity than Islam because of the effects, and I think that's something that, now, I don't personally agree with it, but I think it's better for society. And so there is that sense of the lie of postmodernism that brings about the hypercritical theory of critical race theory, or any kind of, like, oppressed versus oppressor narrative that just you go through life and you grow up and you pay taxes, and you're like, oh, life is not like I actually have to do things.
Yeah, well, what's crazy is
so
there's
a good way of maturing you.
Go, Nick.
Richard Dawkins, I'm reading his quote right now. He said, I'm not a believer, but there is a distinction between being a believing Christian and a cultural Christian. I love hymns and Christmas carols, and he considers himself a cultural Christian. He just stated that
Yeah, he believes.
Like,
yeah.
Oh man.
very recently.
And do you know what's
I mean-
crazy? Here's what blows my mind. This is ultimately what it comes down to. The memes are telling the story. Like, you know what I love about the meme is a gene. It's a cultural gene, right? It's like the DNA of culture. The memes paint the picture. It's you can have based Chad family,
Yep.
you know, with happy wife, happy life, you know, 3 children, a contributing member of society, or you can have the alternative. So the question is when people are looking around, like we're at the stage of life now where I've got young men, women looking at my life as like, I want to be you when I grow up. And I'm like, yeah, you do. You do. Because the alternative is you could be Billy Bob Thornton, or you could
Right.
be, you know, Kanye,
West.
or you could
Honestly,
be, right?
Right.
you should sit
Like
on
they-
that
the-
because I think that's the point. I actually think that's the point
That
of this
is the
entire
point.
episode. Is
Expand
what are
on
you doing with that?
Nick?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's the point. We see these hyper moments, these little flashes in the pan, these celebrities, these like the pendulum swing, and it is, I think, arguable that through COVID and the loss of gender and what is a woman and all the other things that like the foundation is gone. Everyone is realizing we're on sinking sand and people are reaching out to grab that lifeline. And we're seeing that culturally. It's a big deal. But when you said the pendulum and the swinging back and forth, I don't know, it's got me. I'm the eternal optimist. But is there a reality where
There's no pendulum.
Christians are so foundationed and core in their home structure, their life structure, their discipline, their fervor, where they can take these people in, this cultural moment, they can take them in. We can unify like we're called to in Scripture. We can not all of a sudden find more reasons to divide and have another 30 denominations in 20 years. And what if the takeaway is our lives are supposed to be there, and we're supposed to be ready for when this moment happens, and it's happening right now.
It's always been. No, this is what's crazy.
I know
agree
it's
with
always
you.
been.
Yeah,
I'm just saying this
No.
moment right now is exciting
Yeah.
for that reason.
it is. Yeah, because this is the human. You know, I love that Israel. The name, you know, Israel, like you said, is to wrestle with God, right? Like, why are you wrestling with God? Well, it's give and it's take. It's like you're pulling away, you're submitting, you're pulling away, you're submitting. Like the thing that is so frustrating is as a human is that like this pattern. That's why I keep going back to this book, The Fourth Turning, because I think the generational thing is a very apt way to look at this, is that we go through these phases where our sin is fully manifest and we reap the fruit of a generation of sin. We taste it and it is bitter. We turn to the faithful, to the good fruit. We say, how do we have that? Everybody decides they're going to be about that life. Then they forget. Then they want to go off and plant their own vineyard. And then the fruit of their individual sin is fully manifest. And it's very, like, we're in the season of the harvest wherein I can see the wheat and the tares. And it's that simple. I can look, a child can be born and they can be like, I can go with this purple-haired person who doesn't know if they're a boy or a girl, or this situation that seems super healthy and seems to be like great.
Make total sense.
Like,
yeah.
it's a very, very simple dynamic. So the real question, Nick, to your point, is how do we break that cycle? And that was always God's plan. The church was supposed to be the same all the time. God's plan for reaching humanity has always been, if you look at Pentecost, if you look at Acts, Jesus comes, he sends the helper, the Holy Spirit. Spirit-empowered community was always the way in which God was going to reach humanity. just like the nation of Israel. When God disinherited the nations, when they were like, hey, we're all going to go do our own plan. And God was like, you know what? Bet. Do that. See how that works out for you. I'm going to give you over to rulers and principalities. I'm going to take this little group over here for me. And if I can keep these knuckleheads in a chokehold and wrestle them by my power, grace, and infinite mercy until my son arrives, and these guys can be an example of what right looks like, then you retards, when you keep screwing up and you keep trying to go to war with these guys because you're bitter and you're angry and you figure yourself out, all of you will be blessed by the example of holiness and righteousness that Israel bears. And when God opened all that back up, that's what we get to do as the church. So
and that was the point of the point of the Abrahamic covenant, right? That I'll bless who you bless and curse who curses you, right? And who blesses you and curse who curses you. It was this idea of society and the world that when the nations would come and see Israel, they'd be like, "You have something. You have something that we don't have.
Something's different.
Something's different. Hence, enter in the church, the Spirit-filled church. You guys have something that we don't have. There's a fulfillment here. You have something. It's called the truth, right? Like, and so it's the same. It's like God's plan hasn't changed. It's just his people are having a hard time being consistent, right?
That's why I'm sitting here talking on a computer screen, and you guys are going through existential crisis in your car driving to work today, thinking like, how am I going to deal with the sin in my life? I'm saying we do that too. I'm not just, but like that, you get the point.
Right.
Like, but the point is like we are called to say this is the way.
Right.
We're always supposed to look
way.
different. We're always supposed to look different, and we need to be careful not to forget. Those are the two things I think in our day today.
Yes.
That
Agreed.
like if you were to synthesize it, it's man, I wish the Big C church. It is thinking and processing about it, but it's way divided and it's all over the place. But man, if the Big C church was like, yeah, there's the solid rock, we look different. Obviously, it's pointing to the rock, so it is not the rock. But I actually preferred your comment, Hughes, the community of faith. I think that it's actually a really good point to sit on for a minute, because I think most of the people listening, most of the people in the West, they want that to be the church. And I'm sorry to say, guys, I don't think it is sometimes. And I know plenty of people that are trying to find a good church. Yes, I'm gonna clarify. It is the church. I mean, the church in its modern form has maybe lost a lot of its way.
Has lost.
I'm being gracious, and I'm being gracious. I'm being generous.
God has grace. I'm just pointing out what's obvious.
My point is there's disillusionment because that path, that way, is not easy to see. And I don't know, again, back to the fact that I'm the eternal optimist. Like, I'm not the guy who's like, peace out, I'm starting a home church. I'm the guy who doubles down and leans in to my local church, and I start like knocking heads and like
okay
like
let's talk about that.
Let's talk about that.
All right, hold on.
I would agree.
I want to pause on this.
Let's go.
Once upon a time, right, the reason that we had a house church was because, and this is the problem, so you say this, hey, I wish the Big C church, I agree, we're all hoping and waiting that this thing that we look at as the church would do the right thing. Here's the problem. That thing that we look at and say that's the church, it's not the church. It's not the church.
Correct.
It is a corporation. It's a corporation, okay, that does ministry, that is well-meaning, that sees itself as basically a cultural modern manifestation of what that looks like. But we don't need that. So, like, here's my frustration. Ephesians says, point of the church is to equip the saints for the work of the kingdom. If you want to do what God has called us to do, to demonstrate and embody spirit-filled community in Christ, you can do that with yourself and your neighbors and your friends. And if you dedicate yourself to the equipping of each other for the work of the kingdom that you are doing, you have outpaced 80% of the churches
That's true.
in America. So why would we waste our time trying to drag a system that has overhead and power dynamics?
people-
No, I'm serious. And power
people
dynamics
drink
are
milk.
all
You
these
are.
things.
Because people drink milk.
Yeah,
That's
but what I'm saying is the
the
people
foundation
perish
of
for
it.
lack of knowledge. So
I
what I'm
agree.
trying to say is,
Look.
what I'm trying to say is, if your church is receptive, fantastic. If your
That is
leadership
what
is
I'm
moving in that
saying,
direction,
obviously.
great. I know, but what I'm getting at is it's still functionally, we're bailing water from the Titanic. That system is not sustainable, and it's not a biblical model. Like, you do not see 20,000, 10,000 people and like, it just breeds this corporate mentality of like, I have to I get fired up about this because it's like,
No, don't say.
Tell us
You
what you really
can't-
think, Josh.
you cannot disciple people that way. Form follows function. If you tell people, come and be a part of our community, plug in, you create a community outside of their community, now that community has its own overhead. A community already exists. That person lives somewhere. They have neighbors. They go to a job. That job has people. Like, this whole idea of that book, like the third place, you don't need a third place. 2 places is enough. Like, maybe in your 20s, but like, I don't know many people in their 30s going like, you know what I need? Another place to be during the week. Other than like hanging out with my kids and doing the thing I have to do because Adam and Eve couldn't keep it together. Like, it's
So
just
you're
frustrating.
Go ahead, Anderson.
I'm done.
You go ahead, Nick. I don't.
So
you,
no.
this is your
I'm
response.
I'm not per se pushing back, but I will say I am not speaking in as black and white of terms. The church I go to has 600-700 in off season, and if you count college kids, it's 1,200 in the high peak season. And yes, we could do a whole episode on mega churches. Actually, that's probably a good idea. We should make a note of that. But
And we will.
But the point of my eternal optimism, the point of, like, by all means, if you're listening to this and you're looking for a church, don't go try and hit your head against a brick wall in an ossified mega church that's not going to let you do anything. But if you're there to play a role in stewarding and serving the body, I would say find a church that's going to let you have opportunities to do that. And it can be both. Like, we had a house church for a while. Fun fact, I never called it my church. We met in vibrant community and discipled one another, and it was rich and it was beautiful. But I never stopped going to church on Sunday mornings.
See, okay, well, what is that? So you say that. Like, talk about that. You never called it your church. Explain
What
to
I'm
me what
saying
you
is-
received from that church that you did not receive from what we were doing.
What I'm saying
In the biblical
is
concept.
both.
No.
No. Let me finish. I'm
You
gonna
went to a
answer your
worship
question.
service and you listened to a dude talk from a podium.
Well, hold
And in
on.
the
There was
other
all
one,
kinds of.
you poured into. No, listen, I'm serious. On the other side, you poured into lives. You did life with multiple communities. You received wisdom from not just from a person who had a degree, from your friends. You built relationships. You helped raise children. You connected people's lives together, and you grew as a Christian, and you discipled people. So how is that? Like, what is special about going to a building and listening to a pastor and
think he's
going to a
making the
worship service that's
distinction.
different?
Yeah, I'm not
I don't
making
think
that
he's making the
distinction. I'm saying
distinction
both
between like
were
one is
good.
church and not. They're both good.
Well, you said you didn't call
I'm
it
saying-
your church.
Listen, I'm saying they were both church.
Okay,
I
there we
didn't
go. I'll
all of a
accept that.
sudden I didn't start walking around telling people I'm so Christian I go to 2 churches. All
Get off
I'm
my lawn,
saying,
because there's only one church. The church,
Right.
The Catholic Church, not the Holy Roman
I'm going to
Catholic
finish
Church.
my
Don't
thought,
get it
and
twisted.
then
Go
Anderson,
ahead.
you can
I'm being
go.
funny. Go ahead.
My last thought is, yes, there was deep spiritual vibrance and discipleship and a million good things.
Yes.
Yet that one, okay, we're not going to run down this rabbit trail, but that one didn't last. Children
Agreed.
blew us up.
I know.
Okay? And
Life,
there are
it
seasons
happens.
for everything.
Life.
There are
Yes.
seasons. I'm with you. There are seasons for everything. But the same church that I was attending when I was apparently going to 2 churches is still there. And I'm still plugged
not
in.
doing a lot. It's easy to keep something
No,
going
no,
when
no,
all
no,
you do
no,
is
no,
2
no,
things.
no,
It's so true.
No.
Come on.
I am
Hold on.
in the elder. Listen, no, I'm not done yet. Stop interrupting me. I'm in the eldership process, and I'm likely to become one. I'm not fighting for anything. If any of you are listening right now, but what I'm saying is that if you're listening and you're listening to us tyrant back and forth here, just plug
We're being
in
fun.
to wherever you can find. Obviously, plug in wherever you can find it, and I have found it for the last 9 years of staying at my church, continually leaning in. I'm now the director of men's ministry at my church, and I'm about to become an elder. And it's like I could have been prideful and hubris and said, I want this right away. We could have a whole different conversation if that was appropriate or not. I would say it's not appropriate. 8 years in, I'm now there. And so, that's all I have to say. I'm done.
I want to say one thing on this, because I want to, for people who are listening, I do believe, right? I stand by what I say when I say the reason that, like, churches, generally speaking, I happen to know Nick's church. I happen to know his pastor. I happen to have respect for his church. I do think it's one of the good ones. I'm not hating on that particular church because I know the people involved and I know what they do. So that being said, when the focus is on the right thing, when discipleship is there, when you are, especially in certain communities, Lynchburg is an anomaly in the world. It is I've said this 100 times, it is a harbor town. I 100% believe that God has built that community to nurture, restore, repair, and send people into ministry. And train and send. And so for that, I believe specifically that church is a ministry, and this is kind of where I would make the distinction, is that I would even say that your church, quote unquote, is a ministry but what church is biblically is like the gathering and the edification and all of that. Well, I want to be careful with that too, because I even want to say, like, because of the nature of the harbor town.
Here.
No, I know, but like, I want to be fair, but I still want to make the point, which is like that church is preparing young men and women to go out, and they are creating the opportunities to do that, and they are faithfully doing that. From my external eyes, Nick is far more apt to say that, but is that a fair characterization?
What was your ultimate point? They're a ministry, not a church?
Ultimate point is that I'm saying that your church specifically, I'm saying, does do Ephesians 4, which is to say that they are absolutely equipping the saints for the work of the kingdom.
I really think that's the that's the point of the entire conversation that we're having right now, is you find the Ephesians 4 church, right? Like, I know a ton of people that are church shopping right now, for lack of a better term. And it's like, like the short answer is, it's not you must go start a house church, but it's also not go plug into a mega church. So like there's nuance to be had here, which I think we're basically exploring. And for a lot of people listening that don't have that vibrant community, like that's what you're looking for. Like the first sign that you have arrived is a vibrant, deep, enriching spiritual community. And like if you don't find that, keep going. Challenging.
Well, I remember
challenging.
After reading Frank Viola's book, Pagan Christianity.
That's right.
Like,
Great book.
It was like, well, he takes some liberties. He overshoots, and he's like, I'm not saying that there's one. It's not perfect, church, but the house church is the way to go, right? And it's funny because he's very zealous about it. And so, in the sense, let me finish. The sense that I think he points out something that is very, very important in our culture and the way that church has become. Especially, and I think it more speaks to the non-denominational or even the Protestant church in America specifically. because the idea of a Catholic church or an Orthodox church and having a parish was to say all the Catholics, all the Orthodox in this area, you're going to one church. Here's your community. We're doing things together. You are meeting in each other's homes, and they're encouraging that because we're all of the same mindset. Because there's only one church or two churches in that whole area, and you have to, right?
Yeah.
And you're getting, regardless of whether I agree with whether they're getting, the gospel at church, but they're getting community. They're getting Christ-centered community in that sense. And that's one thing that the Reformation kind of split, is the community. Because the Reformation was just the first church split of thousands of other church splits. Though I think it was necessary, it also fractured the foundation of community in society. And so when we have down the road, I can go a mile and hit 5 churches. How many people, and they're all different denominations. And so the community is fractured.
But yeah,
right?
but
that's where,
who did that?
That's where I don't disagree with that point, right? But because the point that I'm making is, when we have our large assembly of church that we go to, we worship God as a body of Christ. We listen to a message and are encouraged. That's one aspect of it. I think one of the bigger aspects, or the solution, or the direction that the response to the house church movement or the Frank Violas of America is to really emphasize the Bible study groups, the joy groups, the community groups, whatever we want to call it. Is like, you have big church, and then you have your small community church.
Yeah.
And so I agree. I agree with what, and I'm not wanting to
in
argue.
In a perfect world, no, I'm not going to argue either. I'm not saying that either. I hear you. I'm just.
But what I'm saying is, the idea is that the church, and I think most Americans, the way they experience church, I don't think that there is a church, a non-denominational church or a denominational church, that doesn't have some sort of Bible study group, community group, or something like that. And so there is this emphasis and importance based on the small community, small group. The problem with that is we've been so fractured as the church in America that community is hard to come by. And to Nick's point, like, you make the community. You lean into the church, right? You lean into the organization that you're a part of, and you build that community because that's what we're called to do, right? We can disagree about ecclesiology and what is church, what isn't church, and what is considered church. And to your point, Josh, I think that there is a righteous anger in that. I think you're absolutely right. Like, what if we are selling ourselves a lie to say, well, I go to church and it's this building where I sing and I hear a message, but there's no preparation of the saints. There's no Ephesians 4. There's no
any, like, this is my problem. Like, that's what I'm saying. What I get is, like, it's just like I can go to Catholic Mass and worship God and have an edifying thing as a Protestant Christian. I can go do that. I see beauty in it. I read the word. I see the symbolism. It resonates with my soul, but form follows function. And what I'm saying is, if, like, who divided, who removed the whole, like, you got to come, and I'm saying this, I want to be really super clear about this, because, like, I'm saying this as a dude with an MDiv who's a ordained pastor from a mega church. Like, I'm saying this with the full understanding of where we are as a society, as a church in the West, versus when I read scripture, this is what's frustrating to me, is that we had a priest class and we had a temple. And Jesus came and said, none of this is going to exist the same way it did. I'm going to tear down this temple. I'm going to rebuild it in 3 days. And when he rebuilt it in 3 days, he didn't rebuild the actual temple. What did he do? He gave the Holy Spirit to each and every person. This whole mentality, the only reason that in Western culture we got a guy who sits at a pulpit and pontificates is because somebody has to go study ancient Near Eastern languages and culture to bridge the stinking gap to make something, to make it make sense. All right? Like, but beyond that, like, and that's why I'm saying don't go crazy and go say, I'm going to start a house church, and you just became a Christian, like read Timothy, right? Like, I'm not saying you don't need some guidance. I'm not saying you don't need that. I'm saying that there's a reason for it. But what I'm getting at is find a small church that's in a localized community.
Yeah.
That you can know the people there, that you can know the pastor, where the pastor knows you, and the people that you're discipling that this is it's a community. And that's what I'm trying to help people understand, is that if you're frustrated with what you see, because our whole culture is geared towards consumerism. And the reason that my response is visceral is because sometimes the only way to break that habit, if that's your whole life, especially if you're new, is to get away from that. And that's what kills me, is that for people who are listening to this, who are like, dude, I'm a new believer, I'm interested in that. It's like, I want you to go to church, and I want you to get oriented to the gospel, and hopefully meet, and hopefully that church has a small group program, or hopefully you can get a mentor and get discipled. But I also am scared to even recommend that, because I'm going to be honest, a lot of what I see, that's not happening.
So bringing it full circle back to these celebrity Christians, right? These celebrity Christians, when they become a Christian, they submit their life to Christ, they repent of their sin, and they join a church. I think the maturity and the longevity of their relationship with God may stand and fall on whether they have a community that's holding them accountable.
Yes,
right? So
agreed,
when
Josh.
You're not going to be. So that's where it comes down to, is Russell Brand. I think did he join the Catholic Church, or is it Anglican Church?
No,
I don't know.
He's
he
not
joined
Catholic.
a church.
No, he's Protestant.
No, he's not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Protestant.
Yeah, because
okay.
he makes
so
the
he joins
distinction.
the
His
church.
wife is Catholic. We'll talk about that, Russell, if you want to talk about that.
He goes to church. He goes to church. Does he have a community? If he has a community, I think there's longevity.
Yeah, for sure.
We could go back to Kanye West, right? When he was thriving, guess what? He had a community. He built
his own community.
Right.
Dangerous, which has its own danger. That's a cautionary tale.
Yes, but he had his pastor. His pastor, he had travel with him, and his pastor would preach the gospel, right?
Yeah.
And from his pastor did an interview where he talked about what happened with Kanye, where Kanye basically, he said, look, I know nobody can speak into your life, but I'm going to do my best to speak into your life. Yeah. And the farther the distance between that accountability and Kanye went, the farther and farther he started to think that he was God, or the farther and farther, the destruction of his relationship with God. So there is that sense, to Josh's point, that if we just go to a building, guys, and I don't care how great the programs are, I don't care how cool the people are, how great the preaching is, if you don't have a community holding you accountable and digging into your life, helping you raise your kids and you raising their kids, or we talked about the young adult community where the church doesn't even know what to do with them anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Go figure. All of these young adults are falling away from Christianity, but they go to church. They were raised in church, but they don't have a community. What are we going to do?
Yep.
What are we going to do? So I think it really comes down to this community is being the foundational structure for a healthy, maturing relationship with Christianity being cool again.
There's another piece of that too that I was just thinking about as you were saying that. And again, it's because I think about this too, because I know I come out super hot. So if you've stick around with us this long, good on you. Just understand this, that Nick and I love each other very much, and we've had this conversation multiple times. And here's one of the things that is fascinating, and I struggle with this, is some of us are called to places, and some of us, not everybody, I've moved, if you don't know me, if you're new to the podcast or you just don't know much about who I am, I've never lived anywhere longer than 4 years my entire life. I'm 37 years old. My longest run was in my 30s, 4 years, and that was during seminary. I've lived most places a couple years, moving and so I've had an incredibly transient lifestyle. That is not conducive to the kind of community that God has called Nick to, right? Nick has been called to this town He is actively engaged in the work of the people who are permanent in that town, to the work that town has been about since, before Nick and I were even born.
1971.
The faithfulness of, and I want to speak to that because that's the faithfulness of Jerry Falwell, who was a dude who said, I'm going to go and I'm going to win my town. And that town has been winning people and making it. And so even though it grieves my soul to talk about like mega churches and these things, like Thomas Road Baptist Church, even though it's not a perfect organization, will always have a special place in my heart because I know what it was born out of. I knew Jerry Falwell Sr. I saw the faith. I am a living embodiment, as are actually all three of us are partakers in the faithfulness of one dude who dedicated and threw down roots and got it done. The reason I bring that up is this: none of us know what God has called us to. I continue to move. I'm in the military. I bounce around all the time. Josh has had a very similar story, and to some extent, Nick is where he's at. He's local. So you have to be attentive to what, manage expectations when you're looking for church, when you're trying to be discipled. If you are going to grow, moving around a lot is not an excuse to not disciple people. Moving around a lot is not an excuse to be discipled, but it is on you to understand what it is that the Bible and God's word tells you that you need to grow and to develop, and to find that and to ask God to provide you a means to have that, because he will, and it will look differently. So even though we're debating the greater and broader brushstrokes of what is best and what isn't, here's the reality. Life is complex. Ministry is complex. And so what the church looks like should look complex to some extent, but it should be united, right?
And I agree 100% with what you said, man. That was really actually quite beautiful. Here's what I would want to move towards and kind of address with these celebrity conversions. It's really the response of Christians and how we are eating ourselves to death. You go on Twitter or X, and anytime that there is a
or just
conversion,
trust us and don't do it.
or just don't do it. We'll do it for you. Right? But anytime you
That's
go,
why you come here, like and subscribe.
Let's take any open forum where somebody comes out that's a celebrity and makes a claim that they become a Christian. They don't know probably half the stuff that they need to know about the Bible to be a good Christian. All they know is they've submitted, they've repented, and they've confessed with their mouth that Jesus is Lord, and they believe in their heart that God raised him from the dead, and they have these believing loyalty to Jesus, and they are on the road to maturity and growth. And somebody in that place does not need to be standing on a platform, but no matter what they try to do, they have a platform, right?
They're boss baby.
So here's with the response that we should not have. We shouldn't have a bunch of armchair, new quarterbacks saying, "Oh, you're a new Christian. You really got this wrong. You got this wrong. You're not a real believer." Or we'll see. It's like, look, Paul says, what was it in Philippians? Let me read it. Philippians 1, 15 through 18. It says, "Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here," he's in prison, "I am put here in the defense of the gospel. The former proclaimed Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice." Look, this is not a rebuke to say don't hold a good standard of sound doctrine and teaching. Correct it when it's wrong. But don't go and start bashing every conversion, being, "Oh, that's not genuine." Rejoice the fact that Kanye, one of the great, the biggest, musicians, goes and makes this, banging album, and many people start looking at the church again, right? And though he falls away, okay, and maybe it was in vain. I don't know, but you know what? I rejoice anyway that Christ was preached, right? So
yes.
Anyway, that's my 2 cents on that.
Hold on.
Whatever you guys have to say.
Hold on. I got something I want you to think about whenever you find yourself feeling like you're like, what is it doing? What is he doing? This is how we're gonna solve this problem. I'm gonna show you guys this clip.
While you're showing us,
Why
we're
I'm
called
pulling it
not
up.
to judge somebody else's salvation, right? And I think the amount of energy spent doing that should be spent developing your vibrant community and leaning in. And I know the counter argument is, well, we got to say the right thing or it's going to lead everybody else astray. So we got to make sure we let people know.
There needs to be grace, right?
There's grace.
There's so many things that I don't want to be held accountable to that I might change my mind or grow in. Like, I'm hoping that, like, I understand that there's going to a pretty decent amount of judgment that I'm under right now, being that I'm teaching at my church or I'm a Christian apologist. Like, I
don't know about you guys, but I have this universal rule. This universal rule for me is anytime, and I'm an anomaly, by the way, anytime I sense any ounce of Christian bashing, I'm like out. I turn off, I unplug, I don't even care anymore. Anyway.
No,
What do you got for
sorry. No,
sounds?
you're right. All right.
the sounds?
Listen.
No, it's
yeah,
just-
sounds
no,
should be there. Listen, when you find yourself, when Russell Brand gets up and he wants to talk about being a Christian, or when you see Kanye, or when Jordan Peterson goes on his tour where he talks about the Bible, but he's not sure he's a Christian yet, I just want you to think about this, all right?
I'm preaching about it. I'm preaching about the one God. Like a man's church to the man's church of Pentecost.
What is this?
Is what I do with the one more in Mississippi, where that Jackson is. Remember the Lord
I don't
done for us.
I don't know how I feel about this right now.
This
I
is
don't
my
know how I
point.
feel about
Context
that.
for those that are on the podcast, it was a young child
Like
preaching
a 5-year-old.
5-year-old, like less than
Like
five.
a 5-year-old at the
preaching.
pulpit trying to, and they've got him up there like he's a
emulating
preacher,
what he sees.
and he's dressed and he's just doing what he's seen, and and everyone's cheering him on, and they're like, yeah, but this is the thing, right? It's like, is that boy probably gonna utter some heresy? Guaranteed, right? But
Well, he pulled out the handkerchief and wiped his brow like a pro.
Wiped his brow like I'm talking, but he had passion, right? So here's what I'm saying: like, we
my
don't crush
gosh.
children, okay? Having kids
Ooh,
was
that's
such a
the
blessing.
premise.
We don't
Okay,
crush
that's the
children,
premise.
all right?
We don't
Preach,
crush children.
Josh.
That's what I'm saying. Like, one of the things for me that gave me that the way that God taught me grace was children, and we only have our own personal experience as we're growing up. But when you have a kid, what's amazing about children is that I don't care what anybody says, they're a little you. You see them as yourself.
Oh, yeah.
But they have a different experience than you had. And so it's very frustrating because you see them and you love them, but you recognize that, like, you see things differently. You don't understand things. And so then you're able to look at them and have grace. And so what I would just say is that, like, this is a child that you're seeing. Like, when the Bible says, hey, you're born again, like, Russell Brand may look like a grown man, but
He's
he
that
is
child.
He is a
He's
child.
that child, man.
And just
unfortunately,
like
he has
this
the pulpit.
child, he was put on a pulpit and dressed up and made. And so when people look at that, they would sit there and say, like, oh, he's a grown man with a platform and he's a Christian, so he must be like the other grown men with platforms who are Christian that I know. And they're not the same. And that's, that, to you guys' point, to your point, Nick, about Christian bashing. Do you know who's responsible for that? You are. You are responsible to look at that person and understand them in context. And so, what do we do for children? We raise them up in the way they should go, and we pray to God they don't depart from it, right?
Exactly.
Like, that's what we do. And so what can we do for Russell Brand? We can pray for him. What can we do for Jordan
Amen.
Peterson? We can pray for him. And we can be encouraging, and we can also admit when they screw up. Like, we can post videos of the silly things they say and be like, hey, don't do that again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hey, I think that's a great example. Anytime that you see a new convert with a platform, saying something weird, pulling out a tarot card or something like that. You're
That's
like, what
it.
the heck are you doing? Look, visualize. It's a child.
just a baby.
That is a child. He's a baby.
What's that?
You know, like
that meme. He's just a
We should-
baby. I'm just a baby. Have you
Be
seen that
praying
one?
for him.
Oh, that's so good.
No, I haven't seen that one. But
Oh, dude.
Not-
Be
it's
praying-
not right to
be
club
praying
baby
for 'em.
seals.
Yes, that's right.
maybe we'll
right.
run that clip. But anyway,
Well,
Yeah,
I'm
I
gonna
don't know
find
how
out.
do you guys so like back to that point. The what was the podcast all about? The rise and fall of Mars Hill.
Yeah.
Okay, that is a classic example. The amount
one.
of people in Christendom that will regularly tell me how into this podcast they were. I listened to
know.
one episode, and I was like, "This is absolute garbage. I will
Yeah.
not listen to another episode, and I do not
Yeah.
care." I'm serious.
That's it.
The
It's 'cause they just
Hulu
wanna
documentary
bash. I
about
know.
Jerry
Right.
Jr. I was like, the Hillsong documentary. Carl Lentz was in one.
I watched
whatever.
all of those.
Well,
Yeah.
shame on you. But anyway,
I mean-
all I had. I know I'm being. Funny.
I know. No, but I
All
understand
had-
what your point is.
My point is, I think that it is like, don't be ignorant. But man, I have
Don't fall
such
for
a
an agenda.
sensitive filter for that crap,
fair.
and I'm like, nope. I have so much better things to do with my time and my brain power than that. But as a chaplain, Josh, tell me why you consumed this garbage.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you why. Because here's my thing is like people are gonna watch it and they're gonna have questions. Okay.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
and
That's a fair
I think
point.
we have this is as believers and as Christians we have two audiences always. Okay. We have the person who lacks context and who is not a believer, and we have the Christian, and the messages are often different, right? And the same sometimes too. Like, you know, you want to talk about Jerry Jr. Like there's a perfect example. You know, I had people like I sit here and I extol the virtues of Liberty University all the time. My lost friends see this and they're like, Josh,
Yeah.
dude, did you
did
see?
you know?
Did you hear? Do you know? I thought you said Jerry was like this great dude, and I'm like, okay, sit down, come here. Like,
Yeah.
did the Hulu hurt you? Are you scared? Do I look concerned? Does this face look concerned to you? No, it doesn't. Let me tell you why. Because this is a human being who is fallible and who fails. The reason that this is frustrating to a lot of people is because people follow people because they're not brought up in their own ideas. When you understand first principles in any concept, I don't need, like, I can sit here and talk about how Karl Marx has some smart things that he said. I can also say that he said some stupid, dumb things, right? I can point at people who I don't fundamentally agree with or disagree with. Like, what happens to the person is irrelevant. If, like, I can say you did something good or you did something bad. I can look at Jerry Jr. and I can say, this man, God used Jerry Jr.
Oh yeah.
I think that Jerry Jr. made mistakes and now he's paying for them. And now I have to watch that and use him as a cautionary tale to other people about how organizations and, you know, nepotism causes problems. But, like, that's why I watch that. When it comes to Mark Driscoll, why do I watch that? Same reason. Why? Because I was brought up under Mark Driscoll's teaching. I am a byproduct of Mark Driscoll's discipleship. 100%. I was a deacon at Mars Hill Church. Like, that's full disclosure. So if I'm going to put that at, like, if people know that about me
Yeah.
and something like that happens, I need to be able to speak to that. Now, I could just say on the one, because you know how it is. It's like, well, you didn't see, Josh, did you watch the documentary? Did you see the guy who said the stuff? Like, it's new stuff, man. Like, I know you were there, but, like, this is new stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, I saw the new stuff, and it's all the same old stuff. And, like, the moral of the story is accountability is important. Don't let zealots start churches.
And let's take a step, like, in the direction of knowledge with documentaries. Every single documentary has an agenda and an argument that it is making.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen a documentary, and let me know if you've ever seen even if it's harmless, like Planet Earth, like, oh, my kids walk away going, oh, we need to start eliminating our carbon footprint. No, we wanted to see the cool like lizard get chased by the snakes.
Yeah.
Every single documentary
has
an agenda. That doesn't mean that there isn't certain truths, things to them that we could get from them. But the problem is, so many things within media are just hooking people, and they're just like, everything about this that they say is absolutely true. It's the problem that we've gone through in, I think, probably really the last generation was our generation with the mainstream media. Like, now everybody's totally disillusioned by the mainstream media. But I remember when I was in high school, I'm watching Hannity and Combs, I'm watching, Crossfire, Tucker Carlson, I'm watching, CNN, I'm watching MSNBC, and I'm like, man, these guys.
I'm telling God about this podcast.
Yeah, right. Like that was the mainstream media. It was essentially like that was where you got information, and now we've moved away from that because everybody looks like whoa, everybody's got an agenda. Everybody's being dishonest, right? So approaching reality like that, like saying,
but I'll say this too, Josh,
and let's let go of the bad. Right?
Yeah, agreed. But here's the other difference too. As I say, you got to look at your heart. Like God sees the heart in all things.
Yeah.
We need to just be honest with before God and ourselves. Here's the reality. When I watch, like, a lot of people watch that to see, like, oh man, I knew that guy was a scumbag. It's cool to watch him get like. The difference is like when I watch the Hulu documentary, it grieves my soul. When I watch when I listen to the Mars Hill podcast, it hurts my heart for so many reasons. Because there's a human being on the other end of that. There's a person who has been used by God, who I know loves the Lord, who for whatever reason has different views, and then like is reaping the consequence of sin. Nobody wants to see that. So like that's the difference for me, is that like I hate that the reality is, again, consumer Christianity, which is literally cancer.
Daily soap opera.
The fact that something like that can be marketed and sold is because people want to watch Christians fail. And that is
evident through all of the
spoiler alert, we all fail, folks.
Yep. Christians aren't perfect.
Stop contributing to the problem. Worry about your own heart and pray for those who are failing.
Because Dad already knows.
Worry about the timber in your own eye, not the speck in your brother's.
Go ahead and tell God something he doesn't already know about me.
Well, we should come up with like a plank award. We have
Justin Peterson is
that's not bad.
Is the first
Jordan
one.
Peterson. Jordan.
No,
Justin Peterson.
No,
or Justin Peters.
Peterson.
Not
Justin Peters. Yeah.
Oh, Justin Peters.
I have no idea what that is.
We could get into another. He's a heresy hunter that basically goes after every Christian. Now,
he
granted,
some of them
are well
we gonna
deserved,
be famous?
but he's
okay.
Yeah, no, he goes after like righteously so. I mean, the guy did his dissertation on Benny Hinn. Like,
that's easy. That's like saying I went to the T-ball World Series.
Right? So then it's like everybody else that doesn't fall in line, like this is his, he goes after it. But, admittingly, he had been preaching for like years without actually being a Christian. I don't understand how that works, but anyway, enough about him.
Sorry, I'm done.
So the moral of the story, folks, on the I'm Telling God About This podcast is that we're in a cultural moment. Take personal responsibility. Don't be a consumerist Christian.
Yeah.
Lean in. Start vibrant communities of faith. Pray for your leaders, your celebrities, and like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Let us know what you thought. We engage with all of our comments. And yeah, if you feel for it, share this episode with your friends. We will see you guys next time.
Seriously, we want to hear from you. We really appreciate feedback.
Yes,
we've gotten a lot of it.
The last episode, actually, Anderson, heard we had a lot of feedback. So yeah, that shapes what we're going to talk about in the future. So it looks like we might circle back around to the Christian dating idea.
Yeah,
which I'm excited about. I would love to unpack that. I did not anticipate my comment around, what was it, Josh? What did I say? Sophisticated women? No. Elegant.
Oh, yeah.
Elegant.
Of all the
elegant
things.
Women.
Like, that's what triggered people?
I'm paying a huge compliment. Like, I would normally call them like unicorns, like unicorn status chicks. And it's like, I said elegant.
Should have gone with that.
Was the thing. That was the thing.
Should have gone with that.
No, but I think
elegant sounds too based.
But it is. But look, it's a window into the way that things are received, and it's interesting. It's interesting to see those perspectives. So love to talk about it. So.
You know
Yeah,
what?
I'll
You're gonna
talk
marry
about-
a man.
hey,
You're gonna have an arranged
We'll
marriage.
talk about unicorns all day long because I've known unicorn men and unicorn women, and it's like I joke about starting an underground dating service one day because I know all
Okay,
the guys
so
who don't
that's
watch
where it's
porn.
going.
So if
That's
you're
true.
a girl who wants to date somebody who's not watching porn, leave a comment below.
There's like 5 of them.
Oh my
We went off the rails here at the end of this
Anyway.
episode, but that's
We
what you're
might
here
end
for.
See you next time,
early.
folks.
No, don't cut
I don't
it.
even know how far we
Leave
are.
it.
How many hours have you been
Leave
recording
it.
at this point?
An
All
hour
right.
and a half. All
Love
right.
it.
Love y'all.
And we're done.